Hey friends, welcome to day 0 of the 2024 Easter Stitch Along. Today we are going to prepare our hoops and transfer our patterns and get ready for stitching on day 1. I'm going to go over a few different methods of how you can do this, but most importantly I'm going to go over using the pilot friction pin method, which is what is included in my kits. So let's get started. All right, so there are a lot of different transfer methods that you can use. I'm going to quickly go over 3 different methods, and then I'm going to then show you how I do it based on those who buy my kit. So the first method is using this water-soluble paper. This is something that you just send through the printer. It has a sticky adhesive on the other side. You cut it down to size, and then you put it directly on your prepared hoop. Obviously, there'd be nothing on the hoop. It would just be the fabric. I like this method for those who are fearful of tracing because it does help give you very precise lines for when you're stitching, but you do have to feel comfortable with putting your piece under water in order to get this sticky paper off. And so that's the one thing that makes me a little nervous about this. Another method is printing on fabric. I really like this for my stitch along videos because it provides a very exact tracing so that people really know what I'm stitching at all times and it doesn't seem confusing at all. But the method I will always recommend and what's always included in my kits is this right here, using the pilot friction pin. So the pilot friction pin is just a regular pin that happens to come off with heat. This is not specifically a crafter tool, but it has very quickly become a crafter's tool. So let's talk about how to use the pilot friction pin. Now, in order to use this pilot friction method, you need your hoop, your fabric, and inside my kits there's 2 pieces of fabric, the pilot friction pin, and then your pattern right here. So the first thing you need to do is prepare your hoop with your stitching fabric. This is the Kona fabric inside of my kits. This is a slightly creamier color, and whenever you open it, you'll be able to see. Sometimes in your own house, you might have a harder time really seeing that color difference. If so, just take it into natural light and you should be able to see the difference, no problem. So here you can see the Kona is this cream color, and then this is our thin cotton that's more meant for helping create more tension inside of your hoop. So first, we need to prepare this Kona fabric. So scoot everything aside other than your hoop and your Kona fabric. If your hoop has this little black piece, you can take that right off. Loosen the top and take the 2 pieces apart. Now using this bottom piece that does not have the nut on the top, you're going to center it under your fabric. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you do want it centered so that when you do your tracing and you have to then later remove this piece, it's not going to be wonky and leave you with too little fabric later when you have to kind of stretch the fabric out a little bit. So next, you're going to get the hoop with the nut on the top, unscrew it a little bit, and place it on top. And this will really be able to tell you if you had that fabric centered or not. Tighten it just a little bit at the top, and then you're going to gently pull all the way around the edges. And I like to do it at the same time, both sides, so that way I'm pulling my fabric nice and evenly. Tighten it a little bit more, and then continue to just pull it all the way through. Again, doing both sides evenly at the same time. Tighten again, and you really want to just keep doing this until you cannot tighten your fabric anymore. And then you know it's tight enough when you hit it and you hear a drum sound. That is when you know you are good to go. All right, so next we want to get our pattern. All right, so once you have grabbed your pattern, you actually want to turn it upside down and put it directly onto your hoop. Now you do want to make sure it's nice and centered, so maybe holding both pieces, just make sure it's nice and centered there in your hoop and that you'll be able to trace the whole thing without having to remove the fabric or anything. So once you know it's good, flip it back over and tape it down. Now you might need to cut any excess off that's fine. Just so long as you're not cutting the design, then you're okay. I do suggest taping it down though, because you don't want this pattern to end up moving in the middle of you tracing. So let's actually go ahead and cut this a little bit. All right, so again, let's center that. Okay, and turn it over and then tape it. Now you're going to flip it back over and we're going to start tracing our pattern. You can either use a very white table like this, because I can see my whole pattern pretty well. You can use an iPad with the light turned on and the screen locked so that it's producing a light table for you. You can use a window, just put this straight up against the window, or you could use an actual light table if that's something that you have. For the purpose of this video, I'm honestly just going to leave it just like this. I don't need my light table. I can see through my fabric really easily, and so there's just no need for me to get another device I don't absolutely need. Now, with your pilot friction pin, you do want to use this little clear part here and push down to get the pin open, and then you can start tracing. When you're tracing, you just want to take your time, go nice and slow, don't rush anything. There's no specific order that you need to follow as far as tracing. You don't have to do your text first and then the flowers and then that, just whatever feels most comfortable for you. Now, again, just go slow. That is the most important thing, because this trace pattern is what you're going to be stitching on top of. If your tracing is not close to perfect, then your stitching is going to end up being a little off, and we don't want our stitching to be off. So again, take a solid 15, maybe more minutes just to trace. I'm going to show you just a little bit just how slowly I do it, and then I will speed this video up so that you don't have to watch me for 15 minutes just trying to trace this pattern. So let me show you just about how slow I go. Now, in this situation, I'm probably going to do my text first, then do my banner, and then probably my flowers. That's just what I'm feeling. It's not the order you have to do it in again, but just what I feel like doing. I'm going to start slowly, that letter B. And you do want to try to avoid making sketching motions, meaning try and keep a fluid motion with your pen. So you can see here, I'm just going nice and slow. Don't be afraid to move it around so that you can easily trace. Because it's taped on there, we're not worried about the pattern moving at all. A lot of people do ask me why we trace it this way when it seems like the hoop is backwards, and that's just because I'd much rather be tracing flat on a surface versus tracing this way and having to push and have this gap right here, and then you're pushing really hard onto your fabric, because then that's going to loosen your fabric and you don't want that. With embroidery, having a tight hoop is crucial. All right, so I'm gonna just speed up the rest of this video and then I will come back at the end and talk about how to finish preparing your hoop. All right, so once you are done tracing, you do want to just, double check, make sure you've traced everything before you go ahead and remove the back of this pattern. So you're going to take it off, put it aside, save it. It's a helpful tool to look back on when you're stitching. And then you're going to remove this Kona fabric. Put that aside and then grab your thin white piece of fabric. And we're going to do the same thing we did earlier as far as centering it and get it nice and in the middle as best as you can. But now this time we're going to add our Kona fabric or stitching fabric right on top of that. Now, because we just had our Kona fabric in there, it is pretty easy to be able to find where the centered line should be, but if you need to, just kind of play around with it a little bit until you feel like it's nice and centered. Once you think it's centered, grab your hoop with the nut on the top and you can tighten it just a little bit if you want. And I like to kind of push down on the bottom and then kind of push down and forward. And so when I do that, it helps me to know if it's centered or not. So if you have too hard of a time putting this on, you've tightened the nut a little too much, so just loosen it a little bit. So here, I haven't fully put it on, but I do see it's a little too far to the left, so I'm gonna take this back off. Loosen it just a little. It is nice if it's already tightened just a bit, but it doesn't need to be too tight. Okay, try it again, see if that, I can kind of see as I'm pushing down on it, I can kind of see if it's going to be centered. I'm going to lift it, push it up just a little. Okay. So once you have it where you like it, you're going to just retighten your fabric just like you did before. Now, I do think it's nice to have this already perfectly centered. It does not have to be. We will take it out of the hoop again if it is not right before we're done and before we finish the piece. So it's nice if it's already centered, but if it's not perfectly centered, that's okay. As long as none of your stitching elements are going to run into the back of this hoop right here and then make it hard for you to stitch later. So this one, I would probably bring it down just a little bit more for the sake of time in this video, though. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as it is. So tighten it just a little bit and then just slowly tighten all the way around. Again, pulling evenly all the way around. Tighten. Evenly pull all the way around. And you can look at the pattern in the fabric to kind of, or the weave, so that you can really see if maybe it's getting pulled a little too far to the left, a little to the right, or some other direction. So once you feel like it's fully tightened, and makes a nice little drum sound for you, then you are done with preparing your hoop and you're ready to start stitching. All right, so we have transferred our pattern and we are ready to start stitching. So come back on day 1 and we will do our first day of stitching. See you then.